Today we're talking about navigating internships and early career steps, and we are joined by Michael Ermann of Amber Book and Virginia Tech. And Michael, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you've been on other podcasts of mine, but this is
Yes,
the
I have.
first time of Archispeak, and I know you've been listening for a while, so this
Long
is
time listener,
nice.
first time caller.
Why don't you give a little bit of background so that everybody can learn a little bit more about who you are?
Sure, I'm in my 23rd year teaching architecture at Virginia Tech. I teach design studio. I teach building systems. I sometimes teach materials and methods of construction. I occasionally teach a graduate class on architectural acoustics as well. And I taught structures. I taught a class called Design at Every Scale, a walking tour, where I just kind of took non-majors around campus and town, and we just started talking about urban design, everything down to the microscopes and that kind of thing. It was really fun. Anyhow, and I also created a course for architects who are seeking licensure called Amber Book.
Nice. How long have you been licensed?
Ironically, given some of the things we're going to talk about today, I was a late to licensure person. I've been licensed something on the order of 7 years, but I was 43 when I finally got licensed.
All right. I think you're in good company.
Sounds interestingly familiar.
I do remember, Cormac, I do remember you talking about licensure with the other two back then. I think you
Yeah.
had a third host, and I remember kind of shouting at my headphones, like, get the Amber Book. We'll help you out. Get the Amber Book.
And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but it was sort of this weird embarrassment to even admit that I wasn't licensed so late into my career, where we have so many people looking to me to guide them, mentor them, and everything else, yet I wasn't licensed.
Yeah, being an architect and calling yourself an architect and just the weirdness around all of that, I think makes that feel like it felt like for you, right? Because you were totally an architect. You just couldn't call yourself
Well, and that's
an
the
architect.
that's when people ask, well, what's the advantage of licensure? I'd say you kind of be surprised. Most of it is just being able to call yourself an architect. Like that's
Right.
from the point of view of the individual, it's just really frustrating to have to kind of decide whether or not you're going to risk censure by saying I'm an
Yeah.
architect,
True.
or talk about yourself as a designer too, or something like that, and have people kind of scratch their head, not really sure what that means.
Or say, well, I'm a project manager at an architecture firm. And they're like, well, what does that mean? It's just like, it means that I do a lot of stuff that architects do that I can't call myself an architect.
I'm often surprised. I mean, people would be, I'm not surprised, but people would be surprised by the number of people at every kind of the long tail of the age of people who are studying for licensure, people in their 60s and even 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. Well, since we're talking about internship programs today, I mean, maybe we'll just kick off a little bit about our first internship experiences versus maybe what we see as an idealized internship experience. And I think part of this is to give candidates and graduates or people who are in school an idea of what to look for in internship programs, but also to give firms ideas about how they can improve their internship programs strategically, proactively. So that's kind of where I'm really passionate about this, and we'll weave all this together, I think. But Michael, did you intern when you were in school for architecture? Tell us about that.
I did. The first such job, I had some great jobs. I'm one of those people who kind of loves work, so every job I've ever had, I've loved, just with one notable construction exception. But
That's the story I want to hear.
Right. Yeah. I'll just start with that one. I worked on a crew that was exceptionally cruel. And I was 15. I couldn't drive yet, so I had to kind of rely on them to pick me up. And they were just drunk the whole time.
Oh, wow.
And they would, and they kind of knew I was probably going to college, and they'd kind of swing hammers at me and come too close on purpose and wait for me to stand up for myself. And I was completely intimidated. I frankly wasn't that used to being picked on. And I was like, oh, this sucks. Like, this is no fun at all.
Yeah.
And so that was, and actually years later, I ran into the guy who owned the construction company, and he said, when did you work there? And I told him what year, and he said, oh, that was the worst. That was the worst group of people. Like, we could not get anybody. We were going to the bottom of the barrel. I mean, they just reeked of alcohol. But anyhow, the first project I had, I just got my driver's license, and I grew up in Delaware, and so I went to Wilmington, Delaware, and I just went through the phone book, and I just rolled into each firm alphabetically, or not, maybe not alphabetically. I probably cordoned off by region of the city. But I went to each firm and just rolled in there unannounced with my roll of drawings and my model from high school. And the first 2 days got nothing all day and got nothing. And the third day I got 2 job offers, and one of them was a design build landscape architecture firm. It was the coolest job. We would be in the office 2 or 3 days a week, drawing up plans, and we'd be in the field 2 or 3 days a week, digging in the ground. And for a 16 or 17-year-old, that was just the most remarkable. I tried, I can't remember the name of the firm. I actually tried to look them up recently because I wanted to reach out, because it actually had a really big impact in my trajectory. Then when I was in architecture graduate school, I worked for a firm that did healthcare and interior design in Philly. And it was one of those situations where it was also just the most remarkable experience. They gave me a big desk. They gave me responsibility right away. They gave me autonomy and meaning, and they fostered growth. There was what in hindsight was pretty notable difference between what they were offering me as an architecture student and what they were offering the 4 or 5 interns that they hired for interior design programs. I'm not sure if that's an architecture interior design thing or if that's a sexist thing. There's probably some of both, but it was, man, those guys were just in the back talking the whole time, organizing the material library, but in reality, they weren't doing anything. And but they weren't given any work to my knowledge. And I was brought on right away, and I did that for 2 summers, and it was absolutely mind blowing to me. I loved every part of it. I still love doing reflected ceiling plans. Like, I think they're the coolest. I think they're the coolest thing. Well, I mean, if you go into a room, like right now, I'm looking out at this room, and the ceiling is the dominant kind of feature, and so I think
typical
it's the most
architect.
We
just look up. We look at all that stuff. I think that's
everything.
Pretty normal.
Yeah, you're not going to get any arguments from me on the unheralded joy of RCPs, because honestly, as much as we spend on the floors, we will have us walking in there looking up, and it's just like, 2x2 ceiling tile, or it's something more exciting. And it was always the more exciting ceilings. You're like, ooh, look what they did. That's nice.
Yeah, I'm sure if you went to Daily or DZine right now or Divasari, I'm quite certain that every project you'd see, you would not see a single bit of gridded ceiling tile in anything.
Oh yeah.
I look back at old projects and I see photos with gridded ceiling tiles, and I see the difference in what even a designed gridded ceiling tile and one that was just thrown in there based on standards or whatever. And a lot of times working in public school work, it is like a design standard that they say what it has to be, and you're just shaking your head. It's like, it could be so much better.
Does it have to be?
I see those and I'm just, it's sad when I see those in the photographs of the spaces that I've worked on. Well, Cormac, what about you and your early internships? Do you have any good stories?
Well, I did want to ask Michael before we move away from Michael. It's like, so you had the experience with the design build firm where you were working in an office and working out in the field. When you were working with the architecture firm in grad school, did you have a similar experience where you had kind of more faceted kind of experiences, or was it really kind of like you were butt in seat at the drafting table?
I was butt in seat. at the drafting table. I mean, occasionally we go take measurements in that on site or something like that, but I really wasn't included in the meetings with clients or with consultants the way that I would like to, kind of looking back on it now that I know more. It would have been nice to be included in more of those. And I got to think that the consultants would have been fine with that. In most cases, right. I'm presentable.
Yeah.
I shower. I don't shout in the middle of things and start turning over tables. Like I would have been a reasonably quiet person who knew when to keep his mouth shut. I hope.
I mean, the one thing that we're always hoping for is interns are kind of like sponges. Maybe not necessarily the whole seen but not heard, but at least just kind of like absorbing what is going on and understanding where they're at and what they're experiencing as part of like that growth. Because well, I know we'll get into the idealized internship, and I can kind of expand on what I'm talking about there. But so, Evan, you want to hear about mine? You've heard about it.
I do. I want to hear about your.
Well,
I want to hear a good story about Cormac and as being an intern.
One of my favorite ones. So after second year, I saw a article in the newspaper looking for a draftsman, and this was the early mid 90s. So draftsman at that time meant a hand draftsman. And I just had my 2D drafting courses and stuff like that. So I'm like, sure, I'm qualified to do this. And so I went and I worked for them. And in fact, actually started working for them. I applied early. They were looking for a summer intern, but this happened to be at spring break. And they're like, hey, do you want to come in? Just give it a shot and see, what. And I'm like, sure, why not? So I started working like not quite when I was finished with second year. And so I go in and they're working on a project that, and Evan's heard this story a lot, but was working on a project that was a church in Montgomery, Alabama, that was, we were doing all the hand drafting. And so they asked me to do the floor plans. Never done a floor plan in my life. Did they sit down and tell me what a floor plan needed to look like? They gave me some drawings and said, this is what we want you to produce. Here is the sketches. Exactly. Right. Here's the sketches, do that. Like, okay. So I did. And this was back in the day because everything was out on the table. So you could see it. And they walked up to it. And they're looking at it and I'm almost done. And I'll give the shortened versions. Basically, they looked at it. They're like, well, this is crap. And untaped it, balled it up, and said, let's start over, but this time we'll show you how to do a floor plan.
What an interesting approach. I mean, it's a great way for them to kind of just see what you would do, knowing that they were going to have to throw it away and start over. And there's a lesson in there for you at the same time about not asking questions and things like that. But at the same time, like, it's kind of cool that they just said, show us what you can do without any repercussion. Like there was nothing bad that was going to happen from that except a slight eco bruising.
Yeah, I'm pretty positive I didn't even know how to use the rapidograph pens. So it was just like the thickness of the pens. So the triple lot, the double lot. Let's get a 1 or 2 or 3, and all the line weights and what line weights meant back then. When we were creating drawings and we didn't really know what any of that stuff meant. It's just like, oh, a dash line really does mean something different than a big heavy line. And none of that was really taught. But and you brought up a good point, because this is one of the things that I always tell the interns that are working with me is like, I want you to try. I want you to try to work on this, but get to a point where you've exhausted all efforts of your understanding. Then come back to me and let's talk about it. Let's talk through it. I don't want you to struggle or suffer or anything like that, but I do want you to try it. And that was the one thing that I didn't do when they came up and crumbled up the paper right in front of me. It's just like, oh, okay, well, it was crap. And
you just accepted it.
I just accepted it. But then from that point on,
it was the best crap you've ever done, though. You were like,
at that point in time, I was like puffed up. I was like, look how great this is. And nope. Crumble, chuck. Like, nope.
Yeah.
But that really did kind of lead me on the path in my future of always ask questions. I was the dude who pinned, whether it was, through my own internships or, my early career and even today, pinned a piece of paper on my desk with a big question mark. People would come up and say, what does that question mark mean? It's just like, question everything. Like, well, what does that mean? That's exactly what it means. Question everything.
Do you really mean what you just said? Yeah.
It's like, yes, I do. So it was this, cool. It was this kind of like humbling experience of like, okay, I don't know what they're asking me to do. And so now it's, let me ask the questions. Let me figure out what it is that they're doing, instead of me going away and saying, oh yeah, I know how to do it. And then spend a week doing it only for them to come up and crumble it up and chuck it in the bin.
Do you find that sometimes some of the people in the firm want the opposite, where they don't want people asking questions? They want people to look it up themselves?
That is an interesting question, because I'm working with some people right now who they are notorious for asking lots of questions, and lots of people don't like working with them. And I love working with them because, one, I know that they're looking at the task. They're trying to understand the task. And if the reason that they're asking the question is because either they don't understand it, they're not clear on exactly what the intent that I asked them to do is, or they just want to make sure that they're understanding how to proceed forward. And I'm 100% on board with them asking and over asking questions. Like I can field, and seeing, my little Zoom chat and the little numbers kind of clicking up as we're talking about people who are asking questions that once we're done, I'll have to go and answer. But they're asking questions, and I want them to ask questions. I need them to ask questions because I can, at the end of the day, because where this is coming from is we've had some interns where they'll come in, I'll give them a task, and I'll say, okay, do you understand what I'm asking you to do? Oh, yeah, not a problem. Okay. So then I come back maybe a week later, 2 weeks later, and the task is, hey, have you completed this? Oh, yeah. Come take a look at this. And I look at it and I'm like, this isn't what I asked you to do. And I'm not mad at them because it's not right. I'm sort of ticked off that they didn't ask the questions of, one, let's check in. Failing of the PM, I should have checked in a lot more to make sure that they were doing it. But I sat down with that particular intern. I'm like, okay, look, a lot of people are going to get frustrated with you because if you don't ask the questions, they don't understand if you do or don't know what you're doing. And if they give you a task and you say, yeah, not a problem, and you go and you do it, and then you come back and you clearly demonstrate that you don't know how to do it, that's when you need to ask the questions. But also in turn, if I'm expecting somebody, let's say I'm asking somebody to do an RCP, and they say, yeah, I can do an RCP. And then they go off and they do an RCP. If they've never done an RCP before, why should I expect them to get it done right the first time? And that was where, back to my own experience, it's like, if I've never done a floor plan, I mean, I'm in not even done with second year. And if I'm in second year doing a floor plan, they all went to school at the same school that I went to. They know what is taught and what's not taught in second year. And there was no like architect, like floor plans where we all know what a second year floor plan looks like and how void of information and everything else is. An architectural floor plan is chock full of information. And so if they didn't go through the effort of teaching me how to do a floor plan, how would I know how to do a floor plan?
Well, I'll share one story because this one is something that still, I don't know if haunts me is the right word, but this was one of those things where I think it was second or third year, and I went to work at the firm that I ended up working at after I graduated. So this was like my first kind of taste of what it was like to work in this firm. And there happened to be a VP who was kind of a business development person, and at one point she had asked me to like pin up some of my projects on the wall, my school projects, like pin them up on the wall. They're exciting. Like, well, let's get people inspired around here. And I was very kind of digitally savvy. I was one of the two people in my class who kind of early adopter of technology, which is kind of created the course that I've been on ever since, right? So I had these beautiful, glossy, large format prints of this airport project that I had done. It was third year because this was a third year studio. And Cormac, you and I talked about this on a previous episode where I pulled up my early Form Z models, the space truss that was like in this it was this really complicated geometry. And of course it was a school project, right? Yeah. And so I had pinned this large format thing up on the wall. And then meanwhile, like I'm working on the most rudimentary plans. I'm trying to remember what they were called, but they were like called A diagrams or something for schools, where there were simple P-line outlines of rooms with an X through them with a marker for every space in the building. And it was all about how schools got funding through the state, right? And so I was working in this entitlements department as an intern, where I was drawing very basic CAD plans in MicroStation, but I could do that. And then there was somebody next to me who was working on the spreadsheet version of that same thing. And they were helping schools get funding so that they could do projects, which hopefully we could do, right? So it was like this whole system. Anyway, this VP comes walking down the hallway with some prospective clients. And she doesn't know maybe where I'm sitting, but she points at this thing on the wall and says, and here's a project that we're working on at the local airport, right? Totally like takes credit for this project that was on the wall. And
gosh.
I'm looking, I'm like, are you serious? Like that just told me everything I needed to know about that person when she did
Right.
that, right? And I was blown away, and I'm like looking around, like, does anybody else see what's going on here? This is
Oh my
wild.
gosh. So it's the old trope about the architecture firm not giving credit where credit is due, but it's a whole new twist on it where they're taking credit for something. Like, it's not just that they're not giving all the team members credit for the work.
Right.
They're actually taking credit for work they had nothing to do with, but have
Yeah,
to
I
see
mean,
them
they
all.
employed the intern who did that for a school project, and just totally shifted the narrative. And
Wow.
it
Was it the
crazy.
same person who asked you to put it on the wall? Who
Yes,
showed it?
it was.
Oh,
It was.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
they knew it wasn't.
Oh,
Wow.
absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean,
Wow.
if it was like somebody from marketing who saw something up there and just kind of assumed
Didn't
that
know.
was
That's
know.
kind of what
But
I
yeah.
thought. But then I thought,
Yeah.
how would you not know you have an airport project? Like that seems like
Right.
the kind of project that even a big firm
yeah,
would be
exactly.
aware. They'd be like, oh, we have the airport. Like we're
Exactly.
designing
Yeah.
a from scratch airport.
I lasted longer at that firm than she did. I'll just say that.
Good for you.
Man.
Well, what I'm curious about is, I mean, we shared a little bit about our internship experiences. How have you seen that internship programs, how firms have changed or evolved their internship programs from when we were? Because when we were interns, I think it was just really like, this is how we do it. Like, this is how we bridge the gap between school and the profession. And there's only a limited number of spots. I think this is still the case. There's a limited number of spots that firms provide for internships. There's kind of a competitive nature to that, depending on the firms and the location, obviously. That's going to make an impact in that. But I think now it's much more intentional. It's like we see the talent wars, right? We see how people are trying to attract talent. And so I've seen a shift in developing legit internship programs where there's a lot of strategy going into those. I've been through that process myself. Have you guys seen things shift over the years? Rather,
Oh, yeah.
because I think the thing that I experienced before this shift was that it was really reactive. It was like, what are we going to do with this intern today?
Yeah.
And it was always like, I don't know. What do you have? No, what do you have? And it was kind of horse trading at that point, but I've seen that change.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, and I have to preface it by saying I'm still in the academy, and so I'm not really seeing what's happening day to
But
day.
you're hearing.
I am hearing, and I'm seeing it certainly when the firms come down to career day and that kind of thing and start looking at people. It's mostly the same as it was back then, but it's bifurcated. There's a subset of firms that are, like you said, I love that word, that are kind of using intentionality to kind of say, okay, let's start with the idea that we're going to have interns, and then let's figure out how that's going to be. I had someone come up to me 2 weeks ago, and he said that he just got approval from his firm to do like a design build studio with 10 interns this summer. And so now they're looking for 10 interns that they're going to build something. They don't even know what they're going to build yet, but he's been outfitting the shop. So they have he's been basically creating a design build space for these students. And I was like, are you kidding? Like, I was jumping out of my skin. I was like, I want to sign up for that. That's amazing.
Right?
And he's like, oh, you want to help out? Like, help run it? And I was like, no, I want to do it. Like, I want you to teach me how to teach me how to make a connection with some kind of specialized grout. Like, I want to know this stuff. And so there definitely has been a bifurcation, but I frankly, most of what I see is kind of what you're describing, which is there is a scarcity mindset on time from the firms. And I don't care what your scarcity is. I don't care if you have no food. If you have no food, you're only going to be thinking about food. How do I get food today? And you're not going to be making plans to, get food for tomorrow. And if you don't have money, you're only thinking about money. And if you don't have human connection, you're only thinking about loneliness. And if you don't have time, you're only thinking about getting through today. And the scarcity mindset from the firms many times, from an outsider's point of view, when I look at that, I think, you got to be kidding me. I mean, the students will fly out there on their own dime, which no other profession I know does that.
Right.
They'll be begging the firms to spend some time with them. But once they get there, the person at the firm will say, I'm really sorry, I have a meeting today. So I only have 15 minutes, and they flew across the country for 15 minutes, and they're still likely to get hired because they got in front of them. I mean, that's the worst system there is, except for every other system. So
Yeah.
every other system that a student might pursue will be like, I cold emailed someone and sent them my resume. Well, that's worth about 0 points. If I cold emailed them and called them on the phone, that's worth about 10 points. If I got my face in front of them, that's worth about 1,000 points, like in terms of like your likelihood of getting a job, in my experience. And there's a decent amount of research that I've read that kind of backs this up. And your odds of getting a job once you've gotten in front of them are 1,000 times higher than your odds of getting a job by just kind of sending something to them. So this kind of comes back to I know we're talking more about the firms right now, but it comes back to what can the students do?
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of what the students can do is two parts. One part is as a student, you want to find a way to turn that cold email into a visit. So when you write the cold email, you can say, I'm going to call you next week to follow up. That way it's not creepy when you call, or it's less creepy maybe when you called.
Yeah.
And then you call next week and you follow up and you say, I'm going to be in Chicago on the 2nd and 3rd of next month, even if you have no plans to be in Chicago on the 2nd and 3rd of next month.
Yeah.
Are you available to meet at 10 a.m. on the 3rd? And if they say yes, then you better start looking for flights. And if they say no, you don't have to look for flights. But the kind of presumptive approach, one of my other jobs was I used to sell credit cards on the phone. I was a telemarketer, and I wasn't very good at it. But the people who are good at it just kind of assumed you were going to buy it right when they, because I could hear them. They were all in the same room. And I was like, how does she keep selling so many? And so kind of taking the presumptive approach of giving someone, instead of saying like, when is a good time to meet, which people hate that. It's like overwhelming. You start looking through your calendar, you don't know where to begin. But if you give people 2 days that you're going to be out there, even if you're not planning on it, and then they say yes, then you just go ahead and make it. So the first kind of job of a student is to treat it like a design project, follow up with phone calls, get your body out in front of them. And the second part is kind of be the kind of person when they meet with you that they want to work with, like ask questions about their work. Yeah, as a student, ask questions about their work. Like not parlor game questions that are like, but like real questions. Like I was trying to figure out, I saw on your website, you have this, and how does that meet the ground? Or I drove by this public building that you guys have finished and I couldn't believe it. What that parking lot looked different than others I've seen. It looked like there was more shade trees. How'd you get them to allow that?
Yeah, doing your homework to the audience that you're actually going to be meeting in front of, to show them that not only do you have interest in just a job, but a job with them.
Right. And then there's this kind of other thing where so when I used to be I was program chair between 2007 and 2011. And one of my jobs as program chair was I would kind of host the career day that we'd have. We'd have maybe 100 firms come in. Well, we'd have 100 and then the economy tanked, and then we'd have like 45 and then we'd have 100 again. But at the kind of end of the day, I'd be strolling through the venue and kind of saying, oh, who'd you like? And what looked good? Which students are you thinking about? And they'd have 2 stacks of resumes, one really high of rejects and one maybes. And they'd pull the maybes out. And I was appalled at how easily they were fooled. Appalled at how easily they were fooled. Of course, I don't know what the firms were looking for, but if they had just asked me, and of course, I've since taken upon myself to volunteer, but I think this would be true in any field, but especially in architecture, where the faculty know the students in a way that no other faculty know, especially undergraduates in any other field, the way that they know in architecture. And it's in everyone's best interest to assign good students to good firms and, to connect good students with good firms. And so I just think, oh my gosh, if you had just asked me, or can I give you some advice? They always err in the exact same way. It's always, they go for the gregarious, for the outgoing person who's a native English speaker and who they would love to hang out with. And there is a place for that in a firm. And I would too. I mean, all things being equal, why not take the person who's fun to be with? But all things were not equal. And they were passing over people with heavy accents that they were maybe afraid that they would have to hire a lawyer to figure out how they get them a visa. Or maybe they were passing over really, really amazing people who were quiet and not taking credit for group projects, saying this is a group project where someone else may present the same project and just imply it was their own. So you get the kind of person, by doing that, you're almost pre-selecting the kind of person like the woman who showed your airport project, because they're the kind of people who are who are good at convincing people in a very short
Talking
amount of
it up.
time that they want
Yeah.
to do it. Now, there's the other side of that too. The students need to, if you're shy as a student, suck it up. Like you need to fake it till you make it. You have to pretend like you're the kind of person, because nobody wants to hire someone who's going to be a problem and is going to kind of shrink to the corner and be afraid of their own shadow, or aloof, or fearful, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think one of the things that what you're talking about with the advice of students being able to turn that on, even if that isn't who they are all the time. I
Right.
feel very much like that. And I feel like I've gotten even more and more like that as I've grown older, which is like you need to be the outgoing person when you need to be the outgoing person.
Right.
And then you can recede back into your normal person when you need to do it. But this very much is a relationship driven business. And some of the things that you're talking about that students need to do to get in front of firms do the same things to get in front of
Exactly.
clients.
Yeah.
And so you may think that you're just going to do this for now to get a place in a firm. You're going to do this your entire career in one way or another.
It's certainly an audition to what you will be doing for the rest of your career.
Well, and I think our profession in particular, certainly in the corners of our profession that overlap with the academy, can be very dismissive of people who are outgoing or extroverts or gregarious. Like they can think that somehow they're Philistines, they must not read a book, they're not serious. Like there's this kind of like, oh, they want the monk, like they want to revere the architect monk. And so the students sometimes, even I've seen students who I believe to be quite outgoing decide to not be. It's just kind of pull it all in to be kind of the serious artist. And it's like, man, like this is nuts. And as someone, I mean, this sounds ridiculous because it's very much an extrovert's world. But as someone who's an extrovert, I certainly have felt like people kind of, as an academic, other academics have certainly kind of looked at me like, I don't know. He goes to all the Virginia Tech football games. He must not be a serious thinker. Like he's really happy to kind of go out with a bunch of friends at night, many of whom aren't even architects. And so he must be someone who's not committed to our profession or to our field, which of course is ridiculous.
Totally.
But it is part of the kind of bias of the field. So there's this kind of two-sided thing going on where when people are hiring, they want to hire someone that they want to grab a beer with, but when people are kind of deciding who that they want to kind of emulate, they're emulating the people who are sometimes a little bit on the other side of that continuum.
I just had a flashback when you said that because my fifth year, so my thesis year at Auburn, my wife and I had our first child. And
cool.
My professor basically pulled me into his office and said, I'm really kind of concerned about you moving forward because
you're not going to be committed enough.
Exactly. That was it. He was like, you need to eat, breathe.
Wow, that is some 1950s stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Like you have a kid, so you're no longer serious.
I was not committed to. I was not serious about both my education and also the profession. And so he was encouraging me to drop out, even though I was like at the time, and it was like kind of like the big producer of the most work or whatever. And I had already interned for 4 years. So I actually had built projects by the time I had graduated. And I was just like, how can I not be committed to this? I mean, like I'm
crazy.
And it was just this like,
wow.
Architecture doesn't have to be every second of your life to be committed to architecture as a profession.
Did that put self-doubt into you when that person put that on you? I'm curious because I think so we see this all the time. We see this a lot with women who they're bearing the children, right? And they leave and there's no place for that position when they come back, when they want to come back a lot of times. Like we've lived through this as well, right? And for you to experience that, I have to assume that a lot of people experience that as well.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
like this one overbearing person is placing their perspective and their values onto you, and they have no place there.
Yeah.
I shared that story with a group of students that we were working with, and one of the older students basically kind of pulled me off to the side later on and said, I kind of experienced the same thing. I've got a family. They didn't really feel like I was committed. I'm like, you know what? This is your opportunity to prove them all wrong. I was like, there's a way to balance all of this stuff out, obviously. But if they're telling you that because you've got other commitments that you can't commit to what they're asking you to do, This is your time to show them. Because then later on, when you are in front of a prospective employer, you can tell them the challenges that you overcame to complete your degree, as well as raising a young family, which then they show us like, wow, this person is like really can do it all kind of thing. And that's sort of sometimes what we're looking for is the, you know, the jack of all trades kind of person.
Yeah. I just wanted to go back to something Michael said earlier, which was if we in a firm just ask the faculty who we should talk, that is a secret weapon. And there are not enough relationships like that I've seen where I have that person I can tap on the shoulder and say, hey, who should I be looking at in the class of 2024 to come work in my firm, and have a relationship with someone like you, Michael, to actually give me a list of 5 names of like, these are the top ones. These are the ones that need to float to the top of your stack, so that you're not looking at the wrong, you're not interpreting the information incorrectly, because the presentation of the resume, if there hasn't been in-person interviews, is all you have to go off, right? And so if somebody is really good at creating a piece of paper versus not, but
even the in-person interviews, I mean, it's funny.
Yep.
It's amazing. Okay. So first of all, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we could do if we had to do a 20-second podcast on this topic, that's all I would say is like, ask the faculty, like, why on earth we don't know exactly what you need. You may need someone who's really good at 3D modeling. You may need someone that who can play golf with a potential client. But in general, I'm in that debate of, do you, as a sports fan, do you draft for talent or do you draft for position? You draft for talent every time. And you find the best person. And then especially with technology magnifying the difference between a great person and a good person. I mean, if you guys look back at your careers, and anyone listening looks back at their careers, I am quite certain that within 2 days of working at a firm, you pretty much sized up everyone. You knew who was competent and who was not. So it happens remarkably quick where they're competent, but it still takes 2 days. It does not take 20 minutes. Like it happens something greater than 20 minutes and something less than 2 days where you kind of size someone up. And it's not that you're never wrong, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare that I've been like, oh, I thought they were really competent, but they weren't, or thought they were really incompetent, but they turned out to be competent. That does happen, but it's exceedingly rare. But in 20 minutes, it's really, really hard. It is really, really hard to get a handle on that. And so you have these people that are accessible to you if you cultivate those relationships. Even if you don't, I mean, faculty love to talk to you about their students. Now, I will say some tips for the firms listening. You're way better off calling faculty than emailing or texting, because nobody wants to put in writing that this student's crap and this student's strong, right? I mean, it's like, that's like crazy. Like, you should never ask for a recommendation. And you shouldn't also, if a student, people do this all the time too. They'll write me an email and say, so-and-so asked me if to provide a recommendation. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a mediocre at best student. I'm not putting that in writing. I'll just write back and say, call me. But most people I know will just say, yes, I can confirm that this student is competent or something, but they're not. Like, they just don't want the future trouble. So,
right.
And the best I've heard is, I heard about someone, and I started doing it myself when we hire faculty. I heard about someone who calls a reference after hours and leaves a message where we're thinking of hiring Jessica. Give me a call back to this number tomorrow if she's fantastic. So then if they took the time the next day to call you back, then they have the opportunity to rave about Jessica. But if they didn't,
you want to advocate for Jessica if Jessica is awesome, right? Like,
yes,
yes. That's a great approach right there.
Yeah. So the way that and if I know from at Amber Book, we have on the order of 15 people who work there, and they're all amazing. But that's because we're actually pretty quick to fire people who are not. And the difference between a very good person, 100 years ago in a pin factory, people cranking the thing and stamping out pins, I got to think the difference between a top 1% person and a top 30% person was like, whatever, 2 pins an hour, like 2% or something like that better, or 5% better. But with technology, the different, and with the kind of the knowledge economy, my experience from Amber Book is that the difference between a a top 1% person and a top 30% person is yawning. It is yawning. And I suspect that if you think back to everything bad that's happened in your career, almost all of it can be traced back to a bad hire. Almost all of it, an avoidable bad hire. And if you think about like everything great that's happened in your firms you've worked at, almost all of it can be traced back to a really good hire. So there's really nothing more important. I mean, this goes without saying, and nothing's more important than reflected ceiling plans. Nothing's more important than hiring good people. But it is true in a world of time scarcity, there is almost no limit to the amount of time that one could put into cultivating relationships with faculty, calling up when you're in town or near town, asking to sponsor studios. I mean, and it's cheap. It is really inexpensive for a firm to say, hey, we would love to sponsor a competition to design a school. And we want to give $500 for first place and $300 for second place. Any takers. And it is really easy for a studio to be like, oh, we'll take that.
Yeah.
I was going to have them design something. I hadn't decided yet. I'll have them design a school. Now we have a competition. And then we can bring these guys in to review the students. Well, these guys can come in and review the students and they can see the student work. And instead of just interpersonally interacting with them, you can see them talking about their work. And
you probably get a couple of touch points throughout the studio semester, right? To actually see the progress. You start to get to know people, then you get to know them a little bit better. And then by the end, you have a pretty good picture of what and
not only those 15 or 20 students in that studio, but you're meeting other faculty while you're there because you're in taking the students for a tour of your project that's 20 minutes away. And if you're in a city with a university, you're attending the lectures and you're kind of mingling after the lectures at the receptions. And the return on investment in that in the medium term, I can't even imagine how to quantify it. But if you could, I can't even imagine how valuable it would be.
I was going to say that like this strategy of just getting involved is a great strategy for developing a good internship experience for both sides of that equation.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is not the job of HR. I don't care how big your firm is. In preparation,
totally agree.
In preparation for this, I actually called. There's a guy named David Keith. He's the CEO of a firm called Hanbury. They have about 150 people. And I don't know anyone better than him at doing this. Like he used to be at a different firm and it was the same way. He would call everybody before he came into town for the career day. If he was going to be in town for any other reason, he'd say, I'm in town if anyone needs a review. He arranges all of his interviews beforehand. He looks over the resumes when he comes in for career day. And he was the first one. Others have done it since. The first I knew of, he would get a room in this conference room, the conference center. No one else thought to do this. And he would just schedule back to interviews one-on-one with people that were already pre-recommended to him. Then he brings them all out to his firm together. He kind of says, like, you guys are the team, like you guys are the group. You're going to get to know each other. You probably already know each other anyway from school, but if you work here, you'll be working together. And we have a mission and we have meaning and you will have autonomy and you will be brought on to projects. So some of this is from my conversation with him in preparation for this, but most of this I already knew from talking to him over the years. He will bring them. So first of all, he's as the CEO of this 150 person firm and principal, he is the person who is most involved in maybe not the last few years, but he said he let it go for a few years, but he is the person who was by far the most involved in scheduling the students and following up with them and really getting to know them.
Being the talent scout. Right?
Being the talent scout. And then he has them working with him at the very beginning to chase projects. And then when they get one, he sends them with the project all the way through to the end. And then they get to see the whole thing. And he explained to me that it was because of a hole in his early career, where he was just doing the stuff in the middle and he didn't get to see the stuff at the beginning or end. And so he didn't understand. He wasn't meeting with the consultants and the clients, and he wasn't there at the kind of stages where people were talking about budget and program and that kind of thing.
When I was at the firm that I was at, we intentionally developed an internship program that the main goal was to get those students, when they were done with it, to go back and talk to other students and faculty and say that was the best internship program I've ever participated in.
Oh, interesting.
And so in order to do that, you have to actually do that. You have to back it up, right? You can't program people to say what you want them to say. You have to deliver the experience that they will then convey to others. And we did exactly that. I mean, we were a firm that, because of our location, that we were not considered as highly as many other firms. Like, we were outside of LA, right? And so when interns want to find an internship program, they often first think of the big firms doing the signature work because they want to work on those projects, and they don't know how those firms work. They don't know what the machine is like. And so we had a great opportunity, because we were not one of those machines, to give them an epic internship experience. And the way that we broke it down, and I want to share this because I think this is a huge opportunity for firms to evolve your internship programs to go from reactive to proactive, right? We talked about intentionality. Like, what is your goal? Like, we wanted to change the perception of our firm for students and for faculty. And the way we were going to do that was by making something worth talking about. And so when those students came to us and they applied and received their internship, we had them buddy up with another one, and we had multiple studios in the office, and they would, with their buddy, basically go for 2-week stints in each one of the studios, working on a different kind of project at a different phase of the project. And so we had to be very intentional about mapping all of this out ahead of time so that that actually happened.
So one of the things we kind of opened this conversation with was what has changed in internship programs from my point of view over the years. And by far the biggest change that I've seen is students have started talking to me about wanting to go to a firm that will assist them in pursuing licensure. And it was never on my radar when I was coming out of school. I didn't really even understand what licensure meant. I think if you had asked me about it, I wouldn't have been able to tell you anything about it.
Right.
And even 15 years ago, I don't think students ever talked about it, but they are saying, I want to go. And part of it, maybe they're telling me because I'm the licensure guy, because of Amber Book, but I don't think so. I think it's actually really, really important to them that they go to a firm, and that's something that costs a firm like nothing.
Right.
In terms of really a rounding error, and they can charge a whole lot more money per hour for those students if they're licensed 2 years earlier than they would have been otherwise. And so one of the things that surprised us the most at Amber Book is how quickly ideas disseminate within the architecture community around licensure in particular. Mm-hmm. So recently NCARB decided to get rid of their fill in the blank numeric questions. Well, they announced it like on a Monday, and by Monday afternoon, like everybody knew it. Like there didn't seem to be, I didn't come across anyone where I was like, guess what? And they were like, yeah, I heard about that an hour ago. Like it's amazing how changes in that. However, given how quickly people are aware of the rules, it is also amazing to me that people aren't getting licensed younger than they used to. It used to be, as you guys know, you had to get all your hours first before you could sit for licensure. That's almost never the case. I don't think it's the case in any state. And yet there seems to be no kind of backing up earlier into your career the time you get licensed, despite the fact that you're likely, that the stats show that you're more likely to pass when you're younger. Nobody who's done it when they were older wishes they had waited that long. Nobody. No one ever said, I'm really glad I waited till I did to seek licensure. The decent amount of research from AIA, you can go to their compensation calculator, and you can see that someone who has license on average has about $6,000 more a year. And so if you're waiting 10 years to not get licensed, you're losing $60,000 on average, and it could be much more, it could be much less than that, but you're losing, let's call it an expected value of $60,000 by waiting. And nobody with kids ever said like, oh, now I have time. Like now I have free time now that I have a family. Now you mentioned you had your family in school, so that's a little different. If you have a kid in your 5th year, there's probably never a good time. But it is a fact that for most people in their 20s and early 30s, let's just call it 20s. For most people in their 20s, there is never going to be a better time for them to get licensed by almost any measure.
Absolutely.
And yet we're always surprised. I'm always shocked by how rarely that's pursued.
Well, it's because, and this is just an opinion, but it's an opinion that I've sort of experienced on my own, is that when you come into firms, people put a lot more cachet on your years of experience than they do about whether or not you're licensed. And so they're like, oh, you can't get licensed. You've only got 2 years of experience. I mean, what do you know? I mean, if you have a license, then you're expected to be able to sign and seal a set of documents. And then they start putting this kind of like pressure and stigma on the licensure of it being bigger and grander than it really is in certain cases where you might work for a bigger firm that you're never going to sign and seal a set of documents, like say in your first few years and stuff, and that there are going to be part of a project team. And then there really is no reason or no roadblock for you to get it earlier. But I experienced a lot. It's just like, you're not ready for this. But then, I also had this kind of like weird false impression of my own that in the Army, when, because I'd gone into the Army before I became an architect, that you always had to be experienced in the next job before you could get promoted to the next job. And so
interesting.
I was always like, I'm not ready to be an architect yet. I don't have enough experience. I haven't done everything. And it got to the point where even when the infancy of the show, where we were just like, you're never going to learn anything. And then now I would actually have finally taken it and been renewed multiple times of my licensure. It's just now it's like, yeah, I should have never waited. There was really no reason for me to wait because
there's no reason to wait.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about, I think, is actually a little bit more nefarious than what you're describing, because there is, as you guys know, because you've talked about it a lot over the years, there is a pattern in our profession of pulling the ladder up once you get there.
Yeah.
And back to that kind of scarcity mindset, the scarcity is early design decision making.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so many decisions that can be made, and senior people tend to hold on to those that decision-making capability to an extent that's probably not beneficial to the building or to the firm.
Right.
And so in the same way, they say, well, I wasn't licensed till I was 40. So therefore, if you got licensed at 25, what does that make me?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that going on that I see. It's really kind of ugly and awkward, and I'm almost embarrassed for the senior people when they kind of take that position where you're like, dude, do you understand what you're saying? You're saying there's no way you could do this, but if they couldn't do it, then they wouldn't do it. And frankly, most firms charge a lot more money for a licensed architect per hour. So,
absolutely.
So from the firm's point of view, it's a no-brainer.
Exactly.
You have a higher likelihood of passing. You remember way more from school. You're missing out on a significant amount of experience, but you remember way more from school. I can't tell you how many people have kind of come to me and they're like, I just don't know how to study anymore. It's just something for those of you who are listening who are in your 20s, there will come a time where you just don't remember how to study. That's right. You wrote that book where you just don't remember how to study.
Right.
And so just being able to kind of do that. And I had found that of the people who show up when I used to teach in-person ARE prep seminars for AIA chapters around the country, and I did over 50 of them, and each one was a whole week, like a 3-day weekend at least. The average age was mid-30s, but there were very few people in their mid-30s. It was a lot in their late 20s and a lot in their early 40s. And I cannot overstate the difficulty people have when they have a small child at home or small children at home, and they have to decide whether they're going to be engaged with that child after work or they're going to be studying for their exams after work.
Yeah.
And so the idea of waiting to me is I don't know where it comes from, but I think it kind of comes from an ugly place.
We've had this conversation, Evan and I. It's just like, if I had to do it all over again, would I? Like, absolutely not. I've now, with years of experience, and like I just said, it's like there was no reason for me to wait. And I would encourage everybody, take it earlier, closer to the time that you had graduated, if not licensure upon graduation, because that's, you said it best, is like, that is when you are in the midst of understanding how to study, understanding how to learn. I mean, as we're getting into the career, we're, too busy like learning how to like put together buildings and go to work and become an employee and things like that. We get further and further away from the understanding of like the academic study and the academic rigor that it takes to actually like pass a bunch of like very rigorous tests. And you said when NCARB announces things, that it quickly appears when they finally said, well, we're doing away with the rolling clock. I was just like, really? Finally? Thank goodness. Because like how many times I lost a test because of the rolling clock, because I just wasn't ready to finish a test, or I wasn't ready to do this, or went from 3.0 to 4.0 to 5.0, and you're just like, well, why am I not done with this? So
Yeah, we had a big conversation about that for sure on
yeah,
this show, and that I agree that was a big deal.
yeah,
But you say, there's no reason why you shouldn't have done it earlier. But I think what I've seen is a lot of people opting out of getting licensed altogether because
sure.
they don't see somebody to aspire to be in this profession. And I'm kind of guessing here, but I think that happens a lot. Or they say like, well, I am never going to sign a set of drawings, so I don't want that kind of liability.
Yeah.
There's definitely arguments like that I've seen more and more in recent years. So I want to know, why should people get licensed? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's funny you say you've seen more of it in recent years. I have seen less of it in recent years among young people, among people of a certain age, maybe, who are like, forget it, I waited too long. And I'd love to see the data on this. Maybe you guys know the percentage of, anecdotally, people have always said, I have that half of architects don't become licensed, don't ever get licensed.
Right.
I don't know if that number is true. It was ever true. I certainly don't know if it's true anymore. I'm quite certain that that'd be hard to measure, because you'd have to say architects at what age, because we have people in their 50s and 60s getting licensed all the time. So you'd have to only survey people at the end of their career, I guess, and then that would be such a lag. But the number of people who are interested in getting licensed, or the percentage of architects who are interested in getting licensed in my world, in all my worlds, it's only going up so far, year to year. It can't go up like this forever, but it's only been going up.
I think for me, it's the people that I'm seeing that come from are people on the technology side of AEC who are frustrated with the lack of progress of architecture in general. And because they're working on either users of or building tools for architects, and they don't see the adoption, they don't see things taken up, and they're like, well, this profession's going literally nowhere. And I'm not trying to be a negative person. I'm a licensed architect myself. But I just want to be real here, that like when we say you should get licensed, I think the thing we need to be telling people is why they should get licensed. And so you've talked a little bit about it early on. It's like, okay, well, the pay is higher. You do actually get to call yourself an architect. Like that might be one of the biggest reasons. You finish what you started when you decided to go through 5 years of school and all the tests and all the internships and all that stuff. Like these are all components of that. But like, is there more? Is there something else?
Yeah, I mean, this is something, I'm glad you asked that, because this is something I've been grappling with for a long time, is why do people even want to get licensed? And like you said, probably, and actually NCARB has a survey that just came out. I'm going to pull it up in a few minutes. I'll see if I can find it. And you can see why people want to get licensed. And it's really heartening, because they have a list of probably 25 different reasons. And then they have the percentage of people who said that was a reason to get licensed. And they had over 4,900 people answered this particular question, if I remember correctly. So it was a pretty good sample size for our industry, for our profession. I shouldn't call it an industry. I think I prefer to call it a practice or a profession, but there's a pretty good sample size. And all the top 10 were all like the purest of reasons. Like, I'll learn more. I'll be a better architect. I'll be able to call myself an architect. I'll finish what I started. I like learning, this kind of stuff. And then the bottom ones were all the ones that were kind of external rewards. They were, I'll get paid more, and my work is requiring me to, and I'll be able to I'll be able to hold more responsibility at work and stuff like that. It really wasn't the kind of, naked careers. And that's because architects are amazing. Like they're like we're just a bunch of golden retrievers that are just so happy to be able to kind of design a building, and just so excited to be given the opportunity. And the ones who have not been in the profession that long that I deal with are the least cynical of the people that I know. And so from the point of view of someone who starts getting licensed, they really, frankly, probably don't know why they're doing it. From the point of view of someone who started the process, they have that scarcity mindset where they just need their license. Like they just want to get it over with. Right. They don't want one more day of they don't have enough time after work to keep studying. From the point of view from the people who have already gotten licensed, I can speak almost uniformly that once they have the license and they look back, they think, oh, I'm just a way better architect now. Like I just know, I can't believe I didn't know that stuff. It's so important. Like I use it every day. How was I going through the world and not being aware of the kind of relationships of these different things before? But from the point of view of people who are not licensed, they don't want to hear that. Like that's annoying as hell to them, being like, when you're done, you'll feel like you'll be really glad that you learned all this stuff. They're like, shut up. Like, I want to get licensed. But it is the case that they see it differently once they're done.
If you guys will indulge me for a second. So I asked that question to a handful of people at the firm, a couple of principals, some HR folks, and also some marketing folks about what is the importance of licensure. And if you bear with me here while I read this, because actually I think it's a really good statement, is licensure, there is a confidence that an individual is committed to continued learning, has in theory gone through the rigor of working on skill sets through every phase from contracts, concepts to CA, that is needed for professional growth and allows for proper compensation. And it's the acknowledgement and respect from peers and clients that is gained. And what's interesting about that is that in a way, sometimes we kind of like push that idea to the side of it's like, oh, well, what does licensure really mean? And there is, from kind of a personal experience where Evan and I were at a dinner with a bunch of our friends, and somebody had like just said, wait, Cormac, you're not licensed? Just out of the blue. And it was just like, it was this wave of like almost embarrassment.
Spotlight.
Yeah, it was just
spotlight,
like, and it almost felt as if, okay, now I'm judged as a lesser than all of them at the table. As now don't I have a seat at the table anymore because I don't have a license? Am I not as knowledgeable as you and things like that? And so there is something to that. And I do recognize that I had been, and you had said it best, I was my own roadblock to personal growth within the profession because there are certain doors that are opened up by having a license. There are like, could I have been in senior management a lot sooner or even higher than I am now if I would have had my license a lot sooner, because people were potentially not taking me seriously enough because I wasn't committed to the profession, because I wasn't getting my license, because I wasn't licensed. And it's just, well, we can't market you as this. And just remember, I was always reminded, do you know how much money you're leaving on the table for yourself by not being licensed? Because we can't compensate you as an architect. We only get to compensate you as a design professional 3 or something like that.
So, well, we should add FOMO to the list. Like, so the idea that you're at a dinner, because it's a huge deal, right? When you go to buy a house, you're like, how can I, even if you never entertain, you're like, how would I entertain if I own this house? Like, how are you looking at a house to buy?
Oh, yeah.
It's the same thing. This kind of like you're at a dinner party and someone's like, you're not licensed? Are you kidding me?
And it does command a different level of respect. Like this is a metric that people use in firms and outside of firms. And how many people do you meet that say, oh, I wish I was thinking about becoming an architect when I grew up? Like, you literally are one. You are one right in front of them, and they get to, they respect that.
Yeah.
They respect it so much that, I mean, when was it? Was it last year, Cormac, at the AIA conference? When was it Obama? Maybe it was 2 years ago, where he was like, I wanted to be an architect too.
Right? Right. That was great. Yeah. And what was great about that speech is when he started talking about architecture, I thought, dude, don't do it. Like, a layperson should not be talking about architecture. You're going to embarrass yourself. And to my surprise, and I probably shouldn't have been surprised in hindsight, he did not embarrass himself. He starts talking about Jane Jacobs' book. He starts talking about what working with Billy Chen and Todd Williams. He starts talking about space and form and light and texture. Like, it was like, are you kidding me? You got to be kidding me. How the hell are you able to, I mean, that's really just an aside, but maybe we should give him an honorary license. It's interesting as we kind of have this conversation, because I can't imagine ever having this conversation about a college degree. Yeah. But it's really the same things you would say, right? You could say, well, you don't have to have one to work in the building profession. Yeah. You could just learn, you could just read the books. You don't have to have the accountability of actually taking the exams and completing the courses and passing them with acceptable grades and so forth, and sitting through studio. But I could just watch YouTube videos, right? And just learn all this stuff. And so, yeah, sure. I mean, all over the place, and certainly we all know people who are really competent people who maybe haven't taken all the kind of steps, but more often than not, the ones who have not taken all the steps, and this being one of them, are not people who are given the opportunities for fair or for not, but they've demonstrated to a third party that they have a certain kind of minimum level of competence. And
well, I will say, let me add to that. So that quote came from a principal who is a licensed architect who only completed his 4-year degree, did not get his professional degree, did not get his master's degree, and went through the process of essentially the apprentice internship process, where in the state of Maryland, you under an architect for 10 years, and you've basically qualified for all of the different hours and everything through NCARB, you can actually sit for your licensure. And that's what he did. And so it's interesting because he's coming from a perspective of he earned it and showed kind of his mettle up against these, academic architects. I don't want to phrase it that way. It seems like
no, but people who have gotten accredited degrees
in
architecture, and probably many of the principals have gotten them from pretty good schools that people recognize and respect. And so, I could imagine that would be back to the kind of FOMO or kind of like all of us kind of at some level thinking like a rapper. You doubted me, and now I proved you all wrong.
Exactly.
And now that I've been successful, you can finally recognize the power that is I. But from the point of view of the firms, I think you could probably do the math in terms of why get licensed from the point of view of a firm. At first, I wasn't sure why the firms were so anxious to have their team become licensed. Now I can't believe that they're not all thinking this way.
Right.
Like now that I actually understand the numbers. But, if you just kind of run out the numbers, you can probably, if you're charging hourly, which not all firms do, but most do, and if you're charging more for licensed architects, which not all firms do, but most do, and even if you give someone a $6,000 raise when they get licensed, I don't know. I think I did the back of envelope for 70% utilization rate, and you're billing at this, and then you're billing at this. I just kind of looked at some numbers on the internet, and it works out to be about $35,000, $40,000 after you've given the person the raise. So you're basically still giving them a desk, you're giving them a raise, and you're still coming out $35,000 ahead. And if you have 50 people who are ready to get licensed and they just haven't bothered yet, and you start doing, that's real money. If it's 50 times $35,000, it's a significant amount of money.
Well, I'll speak to my own experience again. So here I am building more and more specialized experience. And the project types that we were going after were things that were in my wheelhouse that I could just do blindfolded. And here we're going after more and more pursuits, and they want to use me and my experience as part of the leadership of this. But because I'm not a registered architect, they basically have to kind of like downgrade me as a team member rather than a team leader, even though technically I have all of the experience, I have all of the knowledge to be the team leader. But because I'm not licensed and the clients are looking for a licensed architect to be the team leader, that kind of put me in a position where essentially I had to have a babysitter or whatever you want to call it to essentially be the person ahead of me on a project that I should have been the leader of.
Right. And to your original question, Evan, today's Wednesday as we're recording this. So every Wednesday morning, I talk to people back to back from 8 a.m. till noon, basically, every 20 minutes. And I talk to people who are struggling with licensure, or they just want to talk to me about study strategies or whatever. And anyone can sign up, and I'm just talking to one after the other. And this happens at least once a week. This woman, she said she had studied a lot and she was failing, and not just failing, but failing pretty badly. And I tried to talk her out of getting licensed. I don't think that everybody should get licensed.
Right.
I think probably the only person who sells a subscription that is trying to talk people out of continuing to do it.
You want successful candidates.
I want success. I want success. Yeah. And so, I said, well, let's just back up just to your question. Why do you want to get licensed? And she said, well, I don't know. I want to, like you said, I want to finish this. And frankly, it probably hadn't occurred to her. She kind of stammered when I asked her, because I don't think she had really thought about it. It was the next step, and it was the next obvious thing to do. And in her case, I kind of came off of it after talking with her a bit more, thinking that she probably is a candidate who should pursue licensure. But I talk people out of getting licensed all the time. I'm a huge fan of quitting. If it's not for you, it's not for you.
Yeah.
But for every one person that is doing this and should quit, there are 100 people who have not started this, and it would not be that hard for them.
Right.
And not nearly as big a deal as they think. And it's because there's always some old dude in the firm, and it's always old, and it's always a dude who's like way too into your licensure status and is asking you questions. Like, you're not really sure if they're on your side or not. Like, things he's saying are like, oh, you're taking PDD. Oh, I heard that one's a beast. I heard that's a beast. Which day you taking it? Oh, you're taking it on the 21st? Okay. And then they follow up with you on the 22nd, and they're like, how'd that test go yesterday? And you're thinking to yourself, did he want me to pass that test, or did he not want me to pass that test? I'm not really sure. He kind of seems a little bit too gossipy and like kind of too much into the drama of my licensure quest. That's why I'm a big fan of not telling anyone that you're pursuing a licensure. Nobody has to know. And that way you can just tell people when you pass. Yeah, that way you can just tell people when you passed.
Oh, yeah.
And you can be like, you can be like, guess what? I passed the exam the other day. Oh, I didn't even know you were taking it. That's great. Let me take you out for drinks. And if you failed it 3 other times, nobody has to know. Nobody has to know.
There was a point where I stopped telling anybody that I was taking the test. I was totally covert about it. And then one day I basically did it. I was just like, hey, by the way, I'm done.
It's done.
And they're like,
yeah,
what?
well, I mean, it was, you're a public figure. So it was kind of like, so like I said, I was listening to you kind of struggle through this, and I was shouting in the headphones myself, like, don't tell anyone you're taking it, but it does humanize the process. It's not that it's easy. It's just much more doable than most people think it would be.
I think I did want to talk about it on the podcast as it was happening, much like what Evan was doing when it was happening for him too, because we all go through their struggles. I mean, people who wait later to do this are going through their struggles and understanding, hey, there are people out there that are doing the same thing that you are. And if they can do it, you can do it. You've got the drive, they had the drive, just don't give up kind of thing. And we've talked to a lot of people who are like, I don't know if I can do it anymore. And it's just like, do you want to do this? Is this your passion? Is this what you feel like your calling is? And if it is, then it's worth the struggle. It's worth the effort to kind of push yourself through it. And if you're just like, well, it's a good paycheck, like, well, then maybe you're not doing it for the right reasons.
Right. But in terms of the difficulty, I mean, I think anyone who's working in a firm of a decent size can kind of close their eyes and imagine the least competent person in their firm that has a license.
Yeah. Oh,
and just kind of say to you, and just you guys are all back. You guys are picturing like exactly if you guys work together, you might have been thinking of the same person, right? So, you just kind of think of that person, and you're like, "Are you kidding me? Like, this is what I'm afraid. Like that person did it.
That's
and,
motivation.
Like, this is crazy. This can't be that big a deal." And the truth is, it is, and it's one of these things that simultaneously is a really big deal, but kind of isn't. It's just one more kind of tool in your tool belt. It's one more metal on your wall. Yeah. It's also one more task that you can cross off, but by the same token, it's kind of cool and special.
Yeah.
When you get done.
Yeah.
I want to bring us back to internships, you guys.
Yeah, of course.
You've taken off here. The thing that I want to get back to is, okay, so we've talked about all these different tests and the different skill sets that they require, and basically knowledge bases. It's like you're tapping into these different categories of knowledge. And I want to get back to internships, because I think a lot of times when people think internship, they think they're just going to be working on projects. Like you talked about your story, Cormac, as a draftsman, right? And you're drawing floor plans. And I guess the question is, what should people be seeking out in internships? Because I talked earlier about building an internship program, which is different than having an internship. And an internship program leads me to believe that there's structure and intention and schedule and follow-up and an exit interview, and like all of these different, there's onboarding all the way to exit interview to get feedback to make the next internship program even better. So my first piece of advice to students is look for firms that have internship programs, not just internships. And so when they offer an internship, ask the question, like, what is that? What is there a schedule? Is there a structure? But beyond that, it's like, what am I going to be doing? And so this is a loaded question. I think it's kind of rhetorical at some point, but should you be looking at other skill sets beyond architecture? And what I don't mean like outside of architecture, but I mean within architecture. But there's a lot of different roles that you can play as a team member on an architecture project. You could be a project manager. You could be in the sustainability group. And so like should students be looking for those types of things as well? Because I think the goal is overall to have a good experience, but to feed into your future career, which then feeds into the tests that you have to take to become a licensed architect. Like there's all these different elements that make up a licensure. Just like I do believe there are a lot of different elements that make up an internship. I'm curious what you guys think about that.
I'll tackle that first. The general kind of consensus among students are probably first looking for a firm that does what they consider to be good design work. And then when they get the job, they kind of focus on the negotiating kind of what they're going to be paid. And of course, that's important, and it'd be better to get more. But there's all these other things that they can negotiate or kind of seek. And it could be a firm that's going to kind of prep them for grad school. Maybe there's a bunch of faculty for a local grad school that are in that firm and that can kind of transition you into grad school. It could be reasonable hours and a good work-life balance. It could be what I always look for, which is not so much looking for work-life balance, more work-life integration. They just seem like good people to hang out with, and the kind of people I'd like to bring my kids around to hang out there, and the kind of people that I'd like to bring them around to meet my family. It could be a desirable location. Maybe they want to be in their hometown. It could be a lot of times one of the cheapest things to negotiate for a firm to give into and for an intern to negotiate is like, I want to work under her. Like, she's doing amazing work. I want to work in her studio, and I want to, is it possible that I can orbit her?
Right.
And so kind of ask around. It may be a fun workplace. It may be lots of input that they're given to the firm. I think that's a huge one, that the firms would come out so far ahead if they let newer employees do design work. This is a huge, hire good designers and let them design, man, and allow them to do it, even if you don't wind up using all their work because they don't know the code as well and they don't understand. There's a kind of fire separation reason you can't be quite that open in that particular fireworks factory. It could be growth. The firm is committed to you getting licensed. It could be autonomy. It could be people who are going to help you get your licensure. It could be that the firm is in a place that was just ravaged by a hurricane. So there's just going to be lots of work. There's lots of other things. I frankly think that this firm's design work is probably the most important thing. But for most people, it's not that salary is not important. It's that the difference between a high and a low salary is probably not that. They're probably working within a pretty small band when they negotiate. Yeah. So there's probably a really good negotiator probably can't get that much more money than someone who's not a good negotiator, depending. I mean, maybe if they've graduated. Are we talking summer internships, or are we talking they've graduated?
I think we're mostly talking summer internships, because that to me is like really, upon graduation, I think you should actually get hired. Like that's how I believe the profession should actually work.
Yeah, and in that case, I would say two things that sound like they're contradictory, but they're not. One is your 20s are actually, and there's a lot of research to back this up, your 20s are much more important for your career than most people think, because everyone knows a story about someone who goofed off in their 20s and then they caught up later on and they did great, and they give all the credit to the fact that they taught, they were a surf instructor all the way through their 20s. And that happens all the time. But the reason it's interesting is because it's man bites dog. It's the exception. And most people who are super successful at any career, if you say what you do in your teens and 20s, are like, oh, I was singularly focused on getting really good at this thing that I'm now really good at. So it's not that you shouldn't become a bartender in your 20s or join a band or join the army or anything like that. I think those are all great things. But I think all things being equal, if you don't have a passion to do something else in particular, I think your 20s are actually, the research suggests that your 20s are actually a really important time to get a lot of work done on your career and give yourself, it's like anything else, it compounds. It compounds. You start off a little better at 22, and then you're a little bit better off than even more better off than you would have been at 27, and your career has taken off a lot and you're 34. And so on the one hand, I think your 20s is really important. And when you do graduate, negotiating a good salary is probably really important for that same kind of compounding reason. But from a summer point of view, if you're making $15 an hour versus $17 an hour, trust me, in the end of your career, you're not going to be, damn, I definitely should have taken the job with 17 and not the better workplace for 15. Right. Like nobody will ever think that.
So let me phrase it a little bit different. So I come to it in the question that has been raised multiple times with different conversations. It's like, would you do this now if you knew, back then what you know now? So I always look at it as a way of exposure. It's like the same thing was like, when would you have joined the army if you would have known that you were going to end up going to combat and things like that? And so I look at it as like, summer internships are an opportunity to kind of like really understand what the profession's all about, right? And it's trying to get as maximum exposure to like all the different facets. Asking the questions, hey, I'd like to utilize my summer internship to be a part of concept design, be a part of construction administration, be a part of all these different project teams, to get a real understanding about like what I'm up against in the future of the profession. Because I've had many of an intern that has graduated, and I love taking them out onto a construction site because it's kind of the end result of all of their hard work of the design and documentation and all of that other stuff. And they're like, I never realized how much management or how much administrative work is in architecture. and to kind of like expose them to like all the different facets so they really understand it, really feel comfortable with it. Yeah, this is what I want to do. Because a lot of times people are like, oh man, I have seen a lot of people quit architecture because it's like, this is not what I expected. This is not what I was signing up for when I went. And it was like, but you went like 5-6 years of college and you never stopped to just say, what the hell am I getting myself into?
Well, they could have been surprised because their experience in school is typically very different than what it is once you graduate and get into it as a career. So I think you're right on the money here, which is you do want to be looking at these other avenues within architecture, because my school focused on one thing. That one thing was design. And design is super, super, super important. And I think that's a reason why we do what we do. Yeah. But also realizing that there's a lot of different ways in which that gets accomplished, and those roles are also very meaningful. And not everybody fits that designer role.
Right.
Like, actually, a small percentage actually do, because there's a small number of people who can actually design the number of buildings that get designed.
Right.
And so these other roles are extremely important. And so during internships, I do believe it is important to branch out and just experience what those other things are. Maybe there's a better fit for you. Maybe there isn't, but now you know. And to speak to what you were just talking about, Cormac, it's like just knowing what is out there, what it could be like, what it's going to be like, however you want to phrase that, is super important, I think, upon graduation, when you actually are going to go get hired somewhere, because then you have a better sense of where you might fit into that puzzle, at least as a starting point. It doesn't mean you're going to be in that track forever. And I've jumped tracks. I've jumped all over the place. And I could do different roles, but then it also shows you that if you want to really focus on your strengths, this is where I should be in the profession of architecture.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different ways to really look at that, maybe three different ways to look at that. One way to look at it is to say, okay, you're spending a lot of time doing stuff that's not design. I mean, you're spending a shocking amount of time doing stuff that relative to what's design. And you could look at that like a pilot who is saying, well, if I'm spending most of my time in the air, why am I having to spend so much of my learning on takeoff and landing? So, you could say, okay, yeah, sure, we're spending a lot of time on CDs and CA, but the most important things we're doing are happening at SD, and not just SD, the first 2 days of SD, where you're making 10, 20,000 decisions an hour, where you're just making just decision after decision. And it's frankly always shocking, and somehow not shocking, how unwilling we are to back up a little. Once we head down that, once we orient towards, once we turn the turret of the tank a given direction, we just kind of keep going that way. So that's one way to look at it. And certainly from the point of view of the academy, or my role in it anyway, I don't really see our role as making good professionals for the first 5 years, or even the last 10 years. It's more like year 5 to year 20, this kind of range where you're most responsible for the takeoff and the landing, for the most important parts. So that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it, like you said, Evan, is as an architectural acoustician by trade, because that's one of my professions, was as an architectural acoustician. It was freaking awesome to focus on my strength. I'm pretty good at physics. I'm not as good at music as you guys are, but I'm pretty good at physics. And I wanted to combine physics and architecture, and I became an architectural acoustician. And this was like a really wonderful career. And it opened up so many doors so much earlier than it would have been open to me otherwise. I could tell you a story about that if you guys like. And then there's a third way, which is that the times have changed. And so one of the things that I do is we have a transfer program where people can, it's actually very difficult. We'll often have 60 people trying to get in for 10 slots at Virginia Tech, where if you went to Virginia Tech for French or engineering or theater, and you decide you want to transfer into architecture, you come and you interview. And one of the questions I hate that they always ask, I can't stand this question because it's so canned, is they'll say, what makes you want to be an architect? And what drew you to us? Which is such a stupid question to me. But anyhow, they'll ask, what makes you want to be an architect? And it's stupid because the answers always seem both too deep and too shallow at the same time. Like they're just trying too hard. And I love when someone says, oh, I went to see this particular lecture and I just got so excited. Like to me, that's like, I want that person. But that's not usually what they say. They say, oh, I played with Legos, and then I took a course in high school, and then I really don't like my current major. And so it's like, dude, you're not helping yourself. But twice, once each year, once last year, once the year before, when I'm interviewing these people, they said, well, I started listening to podcasts. And I'd say, what podcast? And both times they said this podcast. And this and if nothing else, this podcast is an eyes wide open kind of view of the profession and how it differs from school. This is something I've listened to a lot of your episodes. This is not the first, second, third, fifth, 10th, 20th time. It's more than any of those that you guys have kind of touched on the idea that once you get into the profession, it's not quite what you think it is.
Right.
And in terms of the allocation of time and in terms of the number of different buckets that you kind of have to put your stuff in, it's way different than for most people than what it's like in school. And so I think that you guys, frankly, are providing a really important service to people and kind of letting people know. You guys are both simultaneously you're like cheerleaders, but you're really realistic cheerleaders. You're like kind of cheerleaders for the practice, but there's kind of like this really kind of like with just enough cynicism and kind of doubt to give you credibility. And so I just don't think that it's as common anymore. Okay, that's not true. I mean, when I talk so I also give the tours to the parents, and they all think architects make a lot of money. They all think, that's just really funny, right? They all think architects make a lot of money, and they have no idea that the kind of trajectory of the unemployment of architects. So it's not that the word has completely filtered out, but it is moving out. It is really hard to keep a secret in 2024.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I think we should probably wrap up at this point, but I do want you to tell the story about the doors that were opened as an architectural acoustician. So, hey, let's do something different here. Let's say our goodbyes. And for those people who want to keep listening and hear the story, let's just call this a little bit of after episode story time with Michael. But because that's, I hope that they do. But Michael, it's been a fantastic conversation with you today. And I think there's been so much shared in this episode that spans between licensure, studying to get licensed, internships, career advice, what firms can do. So it's not just the candidates seeking a spot at a firm for an internship or for their career, but it's also for the firms that are trying to attract the best talent, which every firm wants to attract the best talent, but they maybe don't have a plan in place to do so. Because I think there's a lot of baggage in this industry that is really hard to get over. And one of the baggage carousels is the thinking that there is always a line at the door of people trying to get in. Yeah. And to speak to your last point about how fast information gets out, like it's about the perception of these firms as well. And it's what kind of impression are they making? What kind of work are they doing? Do people want to go work there? What kind of people do they have? Are those people talking out loud in public, or do we not, or is it a black box? I think that there's so many things that firms have to rethink and get and totally ditch the old baggage of, well, there's always going to be more interns knocking on the door. It's like, how can you actually have the best interns that turn into the best staff members that you've ever had, and don't have to do it the way that you did, can completely leapfrog the way that I did it in the past and take this firm somewhere I could never have imagined. Like, that is actually possible, but I don't think we think about it that way enough. So there's been tons of great stuff in here. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. All right, so if people want to turn this off now, turn it off. But if you want to hear a story
I want to hear what this is about, because I got to be honest, I'm not sure what the Open Doors is about.
Well, you said you became an architectural acoustician.
Oh, and Open Doors. Okay, I thought you meant literally, because I spent about 7 years researching a very specific kind of concert hall called a coupled volume concert hall that has doors in them. So I thought maybe you knew something about the door, like this physically, there are literally doors in a concert hall that it's like a room that's surrounded by another room, and there are doors that open and close between them. And one of the things that I kind of discovered is the importance of only opening the doors a little bit to get the effect that people are looking for. So I thought you were specifically talking about those open doors, and I was blown away that you had read so much of my academic research that you knew about the open doors. Oh, open doors. Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So it started when I wonder if I should say the name of the firm. Screw it, I'm going to say the name of the firm. When I graduated from architecture school, I was looking for a job, and I was looking both in architectural acoustics that I had some background in, and I had interned for 3 years at that point in architectural acoustics. And I was also looking for jobs just in straight up architecture. And so I was at Raphael Vignoli's office, and they said, we want to hire you. They said, oh, we're interested in doing it. I said, great. When would I start? And the woman said, no, it doesn't work like that. You start when we win a competition. And this is for $28,000 to work in New York City at the time. And I was like, okay. I said, and I understand how competitions work, but is this something I'm going to have to wait? What's the over under and how long I'm going to have to wait was my next question.
Ballpark.
It's basically,
come on,
ballpark, just so I can, do I need to get another job for 2 years while I'm waiting? Or should I move home? Should I start moving into, it's going to be like in 3 weeks? Like what's, which competitions you've applied for and when the schedule is. So I kind of was like, okay, can you give me some feedback as to when that might be? And not only did she not answer me, but she seemed so annoyed that I asked, like, how dare I ask? And this was a place where I got the impression people didn't see Vignoli very much, the people who are at the lower end of the totem pole. But it's as you guys know in this profession, it's a ratchet. It's much easier to work for Herzog & de Meuron and then go work for another firm than it is to work for another firm and hope you can get a job at Herzog & de Meuron. And definitely, especially at the time in the early 2000s, Vignoli was one of those firms. So I was like, oh, what should I do? Now, I had been offered a job at what was probably at the time the most respected, certainly when it comes to concert halls and opera houses and that kind of thing, one of the most respected firms in architectural acoustics. And it was also in New York, and it was paying about double that. and I really liked those people. And I thought, okay, well, I need to tell someone something, and I'm not going to turn this other thing down. They work with really cool firms. And so I went to work for this other firm called Artec. And I was in about my third week at Artec. And this guy named Bob came to my desk. He said, come with me. We're going downtown. We're going to go see Vignoli. I said, okay. So I came in, right? Right. And of course, he didn't meet me. And so I went downtown with him. And at this point, I think I knew a lot more about architectural acoustics than they knew I knew. I think they thought, well, that's a whole nother story. But anyhow, I went down with him, and then Artec was doing the architectural acoustics for the Philadelphia Performing Arts Center, what's now called the Kimmel Center. And it was already under construction. And so the questions were based, a lot of it was kind of CA stuff. So I went down there, and for maybe 2 hours, it was me and this guy, Bob, who really knew shockingly little he knew a lot about theater design, but not that much about acoustics. And so it became pretty clear that I was the go-to person for acoustics. And it was just Vignoli and his right-hand person, a woman named Sandy, and their photographer. They had a photographer who was just taking pictures of them all the time. And actually, it's funny because even now, if you go and you Google any architect, you usually see their buildings. But if you Google Raphael Vignoli, you see pictures of him because there was a photographer just snapping pictures the whole time. Anyhow, so meanwhile, Vignoli is point blank asking me, peppering me with dozens of questions and writing down notes of what I'm saying. And the whole time I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I had started to work for you at 3 weeks in, you wouldn't have listened to anything I said. and I'm the exact same person. And so you kind of fast forward. So maybe you were talking about, Cormac, you were talking about being next to your firm being next to the kind of entry desk. I was not far from the receptionist. And because the people in Artec didn't know that much about architecture or architects. So the woman at the front desk, kind of the person called, again, I was only there a few months, and she says, there's someone named Helmut Jahn on the phone. Anyone want to talk to him? I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll talk to him. I'm like 6 months out of school. So I pick up the phone and I talk to him, and he's like, yeah, I'm thinking about going for this competition in China. And it's Helmut himself. And he's like, what do you think? Would you want to work with me? And I'm like, sure. I mean, I didn't know. I didn't have any authority to say yes. But nobody, we didn't sign a contract. I probably was never even paid for this. I don't know. I said, sure, I can work with you on that. And for the next month, maybe 3-4 times a week, I was on the phone with Helmut Jahn. He was sending drawings, and I was marking them up and sending them back. Just me and him. There was no one else on the phone. Amazing. And these are opportunities that because I was an acoustician, and architects think acoustics is magic, which it's not. But architects think that there's no way that I, as an architect, could understand this stuff when you totally could. There's no way I could understand it. So this sorcerer who's trained in acoustics must know everything. And the same thing happened when I came to interview. So I was 27 when I got the job at Virginia Tech as a tenure track person. And that was, as far as I know then or since then, I'm sure there've been younger people, but I've never seen them. And here or anywhere else. And it was not because I was so amazing. It was because I had what economists call the importance of being unimportant. If you're the only person who can do something that no one else can do, it completely changes everything.
Right.
So I came here for a lecture, and the person who I gave as my reference told me later that the architecture faculty here at Virginia Tech called him up and said, Ermann said this, 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 and this. Are those true? And he said, yes, they're true. And then they were like, okay, at least. And so they offered me the job on the spot. And I said, well, hold on, I have other interviews. And I had other interviews only because I was an acoustician. And these other interviews led to other job offers. And Tech was able to match these job offers in ways that nobody could have. I wouldn't have gotten a lab if I was a generalist design studio, which I teach design studio. It's my favorite thing to teach. But if I was a design studio only teacher and I said, I need tens of thousands of dollars for a lab to do my research, they'd give me the finger. I can't give it to you and the other 50 people who do what you do. Like, I can't give everyone 40. But if you're the only acoustician and acoustics is magic, and then you get in that and on and on and on and on. I mean, on and on and on and on. So yeah, I would say in any profession, it is a specialized, it's a grad school world, frankly. It's a specialization world. I think if you had bladder cancer, you would not go to your family physician for that. You would go to the urological oncologist for that, right? And so this bullshit idea of the noble generalist, you got me going now. This bullshit idea of the noble generalist who is that somehow it's more noble to not be specialized is crazy to me. And somehow if you specialize too much, if you're the acoustician, and this goes back to being the rapper that kind of has to prove themselves. If you're the acoustician, there's no way you could be a good designer. If you're the good designer, there's no way you could be an acoustician, which of course is crazy. But both sides of that divide want to believe that you could never do the other one because maybe they can't do the other one. And the idea that you can kind of specialize and have all the financial and career opportunity and just a chance to really move the needle in a small profession where there's not that many people who do it. And you kind of get to know everyone, and you can you have these books on architectural acoustics on your shelf, and you can go to an acoustics conference and you can meet all the people who wrote those books. And it's amazing. Yeah. It's absolutely amazing. So.
Good story. You came on my other podcast to talk about expertise and generalism, and we had a big conversation about that. And I think you're starting to convince me.
Yeah, I'm convinced that there's a place for specialization.
Well, I know there's a place for it, but
and honestly, we've been having this conversation, like me and a bunch of friends at work. We've been having this conversation about generalist versus specialist, and the importance of both. And one can guide kind of like overall vision of things, but then find the right people to pull in for the right tasks to do the right thing to make it the right project, right? There was a whole lot of rights.
I see it in terms of aptitude. These aren't people who necessarily pursue specialization, but in terms of aptitude, because I teach technical courses and studio courses, I can tell you that the distribution is almost equal. So if you could picture one of those like 2x2 grids, and you have strong at studio, strong at design, weak in design, and you have strong at technical and weak at technical. The students I've taught, so I've now taught 2,000 students plus, and I've taught 20 years of studios and all kinds of technical courses. And I can tell you that it is evenly distributed between those four boxes. In other words, a quarter of them are bad at both, but they keep their mouth shut. A quarter of them are good at both, are strong at both, and half of them are good at one and good at the other. So of the ones who speak, those seem to be the ones who speak, and they say you have to be one or the other, but they're not representing, they're representing two of the four boxes, but people group them together as one or the other, even though they're two different things, right? I just don't believe that it really works out that way, that you have to be good. I think it's quite common to be strong at one or the other, but I don't think it's required.
No.
Awesome. I love that you told that story.
Yeah, that was great.